Let me introduce Alex. Alex de Waal is a program director at the Social Science Research Council. He's a senior fellow of the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative and a director of Justice Africa here in London. He has received his DPhil in social anthropology from Oxford University in 1998, and he's written and edited 13 books. I won't mention the books because we're running out of time. Alex has served as an advisor to the African Union mediation team for the Darfur peace talks in 2005-2006 and the African Union high-level panel on Darfur more recently this year. He was awarded an OBE in 2009 and is mentioned as a courageous thinker in November's Atlantic Monthly list.
Thank you.
Alex, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to pick up on really the last thing that Fink talked about, which is the nature of stakeholding in power, and also something that Sir Kieran mentioned, understand the situation as it is. Because I think, particularly in fragile states, we have a tendency to understand the situation as it is not. In fact, the very definition of a fragile state is actually a negative definition. A fragile state is something that does not meet various normative criteria in terms of capacity, in terms of legitimacy. It's not something that resembles the sort of state we would like it to be. And I think that the root of much of the failure of peace-related efforts, from peacemaking through to peacekeeping to peace building, is actually based on a fundamental intellectual failing, about failing to study the situation as it actually is. And instead of it, actually designing templates to try and build institutions and build states in a situation in which actually building them is not only impossible but actually counterproductive. Not to say they can't be built, but they cannot be built in the sequence that is envisaged. So I want to take a slightly more theoretical turn, if you like. In all of these countries that we're talking about, be it Afghanistan, be it Congo, be it Sudan, and I'm going to talk about bigger states rather than little ones, states that are large but characterized by a weak governing authority, state institutions that are not capable of managing and resolving the political conflicts that automatically normally arise within society. These are all countries which still, in one way or another, function. And in all these countries, you can find anthropologists or historians who will be able to tell you in empirical detail how they function. But those anthropologists and historians or regional specialists are terribly bad at theorizing that, terribly bad at actually creating a mechanism for peace building. They can advise you perhaps on the implementation, but there's a gap. Whereas those who come with the more general theories, be it political scientists or economists, are great at coming up with these templates, but the templates don't work. I think that it is actually possible to begin to marry the two, to begin to systematize some of this quotes, local knowledge into a way that makes it more useful, based upon the observation or in the analysis of how these countries actually work. And Sarah mentioned I was in the Darfur peace talks as a participant in the mediation team. I was also an observer, because one of the questions that's puzzled me is it's not easy to run a country. And it's particularly not easy to run a country when the institutions are so dysfunctional. So how do the Sudanese governing elites, how do the leaders of the National Congress Party, how do they actually manage to run this country? Okay, they're not making a very good job of it, but they've stayed in power for 20 years, this current bunch, and that's quite an achievement. What are the particular skills? And the most obvious thing to do in exploring this issue, as it were, from the point of view of a scholar, was to look not at what they were negotiating formally, the pieces of paper, but what they were discussing in the corridor, in the vernacular. And what they were discussing over the negotiating table was legal texts. What they were discussing in the corridors was the price. And the sort of defining moment for me of the Darfur peace talks was actually leaving the negotiating hall with Abdul Wahid al-Noor, the chairman of the SLM. We'd been negotiating all night with Obasanjo and Bob Zelek, going back to the hotel with him in the car, and he was telling me all the principled reasons why the rights of his people were being violated. Then he gets a phone call on his mobile, and he switches to Arabic, and he tells the person on the other line, they're offering me 30 million, I'm demanding 100 million, but I might settle for 80. And it's actually, that was really what was at stake. It was actually what makes a country like Sudan function is, to a large extent, is patronage. And it's patronage that has shifted over the years from being used with customary currency, the awarding honors and titles and status, to being monetized. Patronage has become monetized, and as it's become monetized, the political marketplace, which we saw very much in operation in Abuja, has become deregulated, has been integrated across borders, so that others can come in and fish in the political marketplace, inflate the price of loyalty. And the Sudanese negotiators, the government negotiators, were quite explicit about why they didn't settle. In Abuja, they said the price is inflated. It's a speculative bubble. It's going to burst. And if we pay this price, then we're going to be driving up the price elsewhere. And who was driving up the price? Primarily the Libyans and the Chadians, but also the international community, the UN, the AU, and others. So I think one can begin to analyze the functioning of countries. As I say, these large countries, I'm not sure it really work in Burundi, certainly wouldn't work in Rwanda. And it doesn't work where you have a real functioning state like in South Africa or Ethiopia for that matter. But countries like Somalia, maybe like Nigeria, like Angola, where state institutions have been captured by patronage mechanisms. So if you come in as an international donor and you build up institutions in Afghanistan or Sudan or Congo, you're not building up institutions that sit above the patronage system and regulate it. You're building an institution that is used for patronage by whoever happens to be in power at that moment. And if we, the international community, come in essentially extending our primary legitimacy to the power that is, be it Karzai or Kabila, we strengthen him, we drive down the price of loyalty so that we end up essentially serving for as auxiliaries in a national counterinsurgency, counterinsurrection force. In the case of Sudan, where it's the other way around, we end up bidding up the price of loyalty for the provincial elite, so the government doesn't want to pay. In fact, might become bankrupt if it does pay the sorts of funds that are being asked for. And in those circumstances, in a number of countries where, and particularly one looks at West Africa, the sort of integration of the regional political marketplace on the West African littoral, especially with the inflow of a lot of drugs money, the price of loyalty has simply become too high, so that there's no money left over for any sort of development whatsoever. And I think that one of the paradoxes that we are faced with is therefore that any agreement that is signed under those circumstances is not legally enforceable because there are no institutions to enforce it, as Fink says. It's only as good. It is a transaction. It is a bargain in this marketplace, and it's only as good as those market conditions prevail. And this leads to the paradox that the more heavily we intervene, the less sustainable the outcome. So there is this illusion that if we pour another 40 or 100,000 or 200,000 troops into Afghanistan, we can clobber the Taliban and then make peace. Not a bit of it. The Taliban are just going to still be there. And they're going to figure, well, the Americans aren't going to sustain that presence for long. We'll just lie low. We could sign an agreement. But the moment they go, okay, the market has changed, we'll be wanting to renegotiate this, and our primary tool will, in these circumstances, be violence. And meanwhile, the likes of Karzai will figure, okay, the Americans will be here for a couple of years. I might as well pocket as much money as I can while they're here because I know the deal is going to fall apart the moment they go. Same with Kabila. So you have the absurd thing of there is an election, and then more and more and more troops with more and more aggressive mandates get poured in. In Sudan, it's the other way around. If UNAMID and UNMISS were to withdraw, it's the international support that is going to give the provincial elites, including the SPLM, I have to say, in Juba, a greater stake in the system than they get through their existing constituencies, their existing command of the marketplace. As soon as we withdraw, then the bargain will be renegotiated. So there is this paradox that, as it were, the more we do in these countries, the less sustainable is the peace. That would be my explanation of that particular phenomenon, to which the solutions, I would argue, would be much smaller international presence, much, much smaller. There's another irony here, which is that around the world the level of violence and number of conflicts is coming down, but the attacks on international personnel are not coming down. Why is it that, in Darfur the number of people being killed all around is in the region of 100 per month, and it's dramatically gone down? Attacks against aid workers, not going down. There's something odd going on there in terms of the distorting impact of an international presence. I think a much smaller impact, but if it is to have the impact of the outcome of guaranteeing a bargain, it has to be a sustainable income, a sustainable presence. If there's a responsibility to protect, there's a responsibility to remain until the problem is ultimately solved. And this actually brings me also back to Fink's point, which is that if the institutions can only be built when there is a settlement within the existing patronage-based systems and if you like, political marketplace systems, which I would argue is the case for many of these countries, then we should take seriously the vernacular definition of democracy in much of sub-Saharan Africa, which is everyone being at the table, everyone having a chance to have a fair share of resources. And if we design a constitutional system such that the election is not simply for the legislature, it's actually an election for executive power and the resources that come with it, then you can stabilize the system. Having stabilized the system, you can make some sort of distinction between what is legitimate patronage, what is illegitimate corruption. Failing to make that distinction, we condemn all these actually functioning systems to being renegade systems. We say it's all illegitimate. And of course, you cannot turn an entire nation's political culture into an illegitimate feature. Then you can, I think, begin to build the sorts of institutions and the sorts of economic development that could actually make a big difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex.